Now, in our previous videos, we talked about adding custom allowance types and then disabling allowance types that maybe we don't use within our organization. And of course, we saw once you disable them, they no longer show up here. However, you'll see that there are a host of other options within here. And what exactly do these do? Now, think of a scenario in your organization where, let's say, for example, entertainment allowance is taxable, right? And yeah, there we go. Entertainment allowance is PAYE deductible, NIS deductible. Every time your payroll clerk or maybe your HR assistant goes to enter entertainment allowance, they need to change this to taxable and they need to change this to NIS deductible. Because if they and if they don't, it will be non-taxable, which is the default in the system. The challenge here is that are twofold. One, the payroll clerk or HR assistant might forget to change it to taxable and NIS deductible, and that might cause problems in your payroll. The second challenge here is that your payroll clerk might want to change something to non-taxable because of maybe an older system that they work with in a previous organization. However, that's against your organization's systems. So those are two of the challenges that these features allow you to set. So let's say within our organization, we have we're implementing some new policies, and we've implemented some policies on some of our allowances. So our severance pay, which we have here, it's non-taxable, non-NIS deductible, and we'll strictly enforce this. And I'll show you just now what strictly enforcing does. Gratuity as well as non-taxable, non-NIS deductible, and once again this is strictly enforced. Right? And then entertainment is taxable, NIS deductible, and it is strictly enforced. And then housing is taxable, NIS deductible, but it is not strictly enforced. So let me just refresh this page to ensure everything's saved, because we did quite a bit there. All right, there we go. Now, what does this do for you? Let's look back at an allowance. I'll go ahead and refresh here. And let this data load up. Let me try firstly to add an education allowance. If I try to add an education allowance, you'll see it's enabled, but we haven't set any criteria. So I can go say that, hey, this is taxable, and I can change anything about this allowance, right? However, if I go to gratuity, let's look at gratuity, which is strictly enforced that it's both non-taxable and non-NIS deductible. Look at what happens here. I am unable to change this, right? It's strictly enforced. If I try clicking here, you'll see taxable is grayed out. So I can no longer change this, and that's because we have strictly enforced gratuity as non-taxable. Similarly, severance pay. If I select severance pay here, once again, strictly enforced. On the other hand, we have strictly enforced entertainment as both taxable and NIS deductible. So if I select entertainment here, guess what happens? It's taxable, it's NIS deductible, and I cannot change it. So that's what the enforcement of these taxes does, and what strictly enforced means. Strictly enforced means that I cannot change it. Now, what if you had set something to be, let's look at housing, taxable, NIS deductible, but it's not strictly enforced? What happens there? So if I go and select housing, you'll see, and maybe I should close this form and open it back. Yeah. All right, so it's non-taxable here. But let's select housing. Where is housing? Oh, there we are. You'll see the Techlify HR once again sets it to taxable, sets it to NIS deductible, because for housing, those are our defaults. However, because the taxes are not strictly enforced, I am able to change this as needs be. All right, and this is how these functions work and how you can use them to really build out your organization's policy, enforce your policy, and also reduce mistakes, because once you've configured your allowance types, you can disable all the types that you don't have, and for the types that you do have, you can set whether they're PAYE deductible, NIS deductible, and then you can either strictly enforce the taxes or not strictly enforce the taxes. But that way now, let's say you have 100 employees and each one of those have maybe housing allowance that's taxable, and this is just an example. Of course, you would need to speak to your accountant on what is taxable and what is not. But let's say housing allowance is taxable. You can set this up so that every time your payroll clerk or maybe your HR officer or whoever adds allowances for employees go to add a housing allowance, it's less likely that they make a mistake on specifying the taxes and the NIS, whether it's taxable or NIS deductible. And even better than that, if you strictly enforce it, they cannot make a mistake because they cannot change the policy that you have now built out within Technify HR. And that there is how these taxes and tax enforcement work within the customization of an allowance type in Technify HR. I know that's a mouthful. I hope I've managed to add some clarity and some solid understanding of how these features work.